Come join me on my second channel, Jaguar Gator 8, where we'll talk all things college football. New video drops every Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern. Click the card in the upper right corner to watch the latest video. And now, on with our feature presentation. For most people, getting drafted to play in the NFL is a momentous occasion. At the time, it's one of the happiest moments of your entire life, and it might even be the happiest moment. When you get that phone call and hear your name on the television and see it pop up on the screen, it's the realization that playing in the NFL is no longer a dream, and now it's reality. All the years of hard work, sweat, pain, and sacrifice have paid off, and your life is going to change forever, especially from a financial perspective if you're one of the top picks. And a lot of times, when players get drafted, they hear the announcement at a draft party, where they'll invite friends and family and other members of the community over somewhere, whether it be a restaurant or a house or anywhere big with a television, and they'll all watch the draft together so they can celebrate with the athlete once he gets drafted. Most of these draft parties are fun, especially once the player finally gets drafted. Heck, it's called a party. It's supposed to be fun. But then, there's what happened with Kevan Barlow, the Pitt running back who eventually got drafted by the San Francisco 49ers. Because his draft party was so bad and so disastrous that it resulted in a ton of criticism and raised a ton of red flags in the eyes of people. He showed up late. He left before he got drafted. He never expressed any gratitude toward getting drafted, and instead expressed nothing but disappointment. And it was so bad that his advisor had to basically tell Barlow to quit acting up, because he was making himself look bad and was losing all sense of perspective. Kevan Barlow had about the worst start possible to his NFL career on draft day. And this is the story behind the worst draft party in NFL history. Before I talk about the actual draft party and everything that went wrong, we need some context to understand just who Kevan Barlow is, how good he was playing college ball at Pitt, and where he was projected to go in the NFL draft. Through the first 3 seasons of Barlow's career, he didn't do a whole lot, as he was in a running back by committee role, whether it was with a guy like Brandon Williams or a guy like Nick Goings. I guess he was the number 2 running back, but if you wanted to call him the number 1 running back, it was more of a 1A and 1B situation. Barlow's numbers were fine to start off his career. He had 1,271 yards and 12 touchdowns in his first 3 seasons, but he wasn't exactly blowing anyone away, especially after he got suspended during the 1999 offseason for poor work habits, and especially after he missed some time during the regular season with injuries. Basically, up until the 2000s, Barlow was a walking red flag, who, while talented, was underutilized and had a ton of baggage, and was seen as someone who couldn't get along with coaches or devote himself to the team. That all changed in 2000, because once we hit the 2000s, Kevan Barlow was a completely different player, and became the feature back. In 2000, Pitt finished the season 7-5, and made a bowl game for the first time since 1997, when they played in the Liberty Bowl. They had a winning record in Big East play for the first time since 1997. They had a winning record in overall play for the first time since 1991, when they went 6-5. And they had their highest winning percentage since all the way back in 1989, when they went 8-3-1. And a big reason for that incredible turnaround and their appearance in the Insight.com Bowl was the incredible play of Kevan Barlow, because by 2000, he was a household name in the sport. During that 2000 season, he was the only running back on the team with more than 75 carries. This was no longer a running back by committee situation, where Barlow was being rotated in and out with 1 or 2 other guys. When it came to the rushing attack, this was clearly Barlow's team. He finished the season with 1,053 rushing yards, becoming the first player in Pitt history since Billy West all the way back in 1994 to finish the season with over 1,000 yards. Additionally, his 1,053 rushing yards ranked 3rd in the entire Big East, and ranked just 154 yards off of first place, which was held by Lee Suggs of Virginia Tech, who had 1,207. He averaged an incredible 5.3 yards per carry, and he scored 8 rushing touchdowns, which led the team, as he was the only player on Pitt to score more than 1 rushing touchdown all season. By the time the 2000 season ended, Kevan Barlow had set or tied a career high in just about every major statistical category, including games played, rushing attempts, rushing yards, yards per carry, rushing touchdowns, receptions, receiving touchdowns, yards from scrimmage, and total touchdowns. Safe to say, this was a really good year. But I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about his greatest game of the 2000 season, because this might have been the greatest game by any player in school history, and might have been the game that made him a high draft pick in the eyes of a ton of people. This was the turning point. because this was the game that cemented his status as an NFL player. If there was any doubt that he was going to make it professionally and hear his name called, that doubt was erased after the backyard brawl against West Virginia. Against a pretty good West Virginia team, with the Mountaineers sitting at 6-4 entering this game, the Panthers of Pitt won this one 38-28, and they won it because Kevan Barlow put the team on his back. He got the ball 33 times, and finished the game with an incredible 272 rushing yards, averaging 8.2 yards per carry, and scoring 4 touchdowns. The 272 rushing yards at the time was the second most rushing yards by any player in a game in Pitt history, as the only one who had more yards was the legendary Tony Dorsett, who had 303 yards in a 1975 game against Notre Dame. As a side note, if you want to learn more about Tony Dorsett and his legendary career in the NFL, click the card in the upper right corner. Barlow's performance was that good, and even today, more than 20 years later, ranks third, as Ray Graham had 277 yards in a 2010 game against Florida International. And considering the fact that it was the backyard brawl, the fact that it was the biggest rivalry that Pitt had, and the fact that it was a nationally televised game on CBS as one of their Black Friday showcase games, you could legitimately make the argument that this was the greatest game by any player in Pitt history. It was also the last time that Pitt played at Three Rivers Stadium. By the time his collegiate career ended, it was very clear that Kevan Barlow was going to get drafted, and was going to get drafted pretty high. No one had him as one of the top running backs in the class, as no one was crazy enough to put him above guys like Deuce McAllister and LaDainian Tomlinson. But he was seen somewhere in that range of the 4th best running back to the 6th best running back, so somewhere between a 1st and a 2nd round pick. Maybe he'd be an early 3rd round pick if he slid a bit. Mel Kiper had him as the 5th best running back, and he was not alone with this projection. Just a sample from various newspaper and media outlets across the country before the 2001 NFL Draft showed very similar thought processes. One Wisconsin newspaper had him as the number 5 ranked running back, one California publication had him ranked as the number 4 running back, and another Wisconsin newspaper had him as the number 5 ranked running back. Make no mistake about it, Kevan Barlow was going to hear his name get called, especially since one scout called him the most complete halfback in the entire draft, saying he can pass protect, and it seems like he enjoys hitting people. Those are good traits for a running back to have, especially a strong guy like Barlow who doesn't go down on first contact. And with that, on April 21st, 2001, which was the first day of the NFL Draft, Barlow heard his name get called. And with him and his draft party were anywhere from 75 to 100 of his friends and family, who gathered with him at Rivers Club in downtown Pittsburgh, which is still in business today and is less than 2 miles away from Heinz Field. This party was supposed to be a joyous occasion, especially since Barlow heard his name get called. Instead, it was an absolute disaster. The NFL Draft started at noon, and the party started at noon. All of his friends and family showed up at noon. So we're already off to a good start when the player who the draft party is for doesn't show up on time. And I'm not talking about him showing up at 12:05 or 12:10 and getting caught in some traffic along the way, or having an interview or an obligation that ran a bit long that made it so that he couldn't get to Rivers Club exactly at 12 o'clock on the dot. He didn't show up until 2:55, almost a full 3 hours after the party started. Barlow knew when the party was happening. He knew when the guests were arriving, and by all accounts, it was never in the plans that he would show up 3 hours late. This was not a surprise party. Barlow knew all this. That's always a good sign when you're treating your friends and family with that much respect for their time and for their support for you that you're showing up 3 hours late to a function designed specifically to celebrate you. By the time Barlow arrived, he was still on the board, so we didn't miss that at least. But hey, he's at the party now, even if it came 3 hours later than expected. At least we can let bygones be bygones, and Barlow can have some fun at the party, socializing with people, and being around his friends and family, even if it is going to be highly stressful knowing that you don't know where you're going to start your NFL career. Well, that did not happen, because as soon as Barlow got to Rivers Club, he immediately bolted to the basement, where he spent his time in isolation, save for a few people who would come down every now and then just to check in on him. As Barlow said about why he spent his draft party alone, "I don't like being around all those people." That raises the obvious question. Why did you throw a draft party and presumably invite people to be with you if you were only going to show up late and then not even spend time with them? What the heck was the point? Do you know how parties and social gatherings work? It's like if I ask a group of friends if they want to come with me to a baseball game. I don't get there until the 6th inning, and then once I get there, I spend my time just sitting in the bathroom playing on my phone. I'm struggling to get the logic here. And the party only got worse as time went on, because by the time the first round ended, and by the time the second round ended, Barlow's name still had not been called. Understandably, as Barlow kept seeing other guys get taken that were not him, especially at the running back position, he got more and more frustrated. As Chuck Sanders, his advisor, said on the situation, he's disappointed, only because he saw the running backs picked ahead of him, and he knows ability-wise, he's as good or better than some of them. Barlow added on having 6 running backs taken ahead of him in the first 2 rounds. I thought I'd be gone by now. It's hard. I thought I'd go before guys like Anthony Thomas. I thought I showed I was better than some of these guys. Thomas went in the second round to the Chicago Bears with pick number 38. At least with this, I'm more than willing to give Barlow a pass, since it can be frustrating and stressful when you think you're sliding down the board, and when you're seeing hundreds of thousands of dollars evaporate before your very eyes. So let's just clear that up right now. This party was awful, and Barlow deserves a ton of blame, but I'm not going to blame him for being frustrated in the heat of the moment for something completely out of his control, because this happens all the time. However, he didn't exactly handle it the best way, because after the Buffalo Bills drafted Tennessee running back Travis Henry near the end of the second round with pick number 58, Barlow had enough. He was already at his boiling point when Maryland's Lamont Jordan got drafted with pick number 49, and got chosen by the New York Jets, saying on that pick, "This is terrible. It's just terrible." And when Henry got drafted, Barlow just got up and left. He didn't tell anyone that he was going, delivering the Irish goodbyes of Irish goodbyes. He never even returned to Rivers Club. He just left his own party without telling anyone that he was gone, and no one could track him down or figure out where he went. Not even television cameramen and reporters could figure out his whereabouts, which shows just how secret his exit was, since those cameramen had one job, which was to get good shots and footage of the party and of Barlow. Eventually, Barlow got drafted by the San Francisco 49ers in the third round with pick number 80, with his slide coming to an end sometime around 8:15 p.m. on the East Coast. And the pick made a ton of sense for the Niners, as Barlow was going to have a good role with the Niners since they didn't have a number 2 running back, and since their number 1 guy, Garrison Hurst, missed all of the 1999 and 2000 season with an injury, so who knew how he'd play in 2001? Barlow actually wound up in a pretty good spot from a fit perspective, but Barlow wasn't there to comment on what this meant, because he was nowhere to be found. Instead, his friends and family had to awkwardly try and represent him in the post-announcement comments. And let's just say that they didn't do the best job painting Barlow in the best light. His mother, Zella, said on the day, "Kevin will be fine. This was a tough day, a day with a lot of adversity, but he'll be okay. God will see him through this. Your son just got drafted. Your son is going to get somewhere in the ballpark of a $400,000 signing bonus, which is an incredible amount of money up front for anyone, let alone a guy this young. He's going to get a multi-million-dollar contract that could set him up for life if he plays his cards right, and is going to live his dream and play in the NFL. And you made it seem like on this day, Kevin just saw his house burn down." His advisor, Chuck Sanders, said on Barlow, he has a great family, and they wanted to have this for him. Well, now that makes Barlow look awful. His family wanted to be there to celebrate with him, and he didn't even show up on time, or stay to hear his name, or even stay to socialize with anyone. And Sanders continued to dig Barlow's grave even more, when he said, "I told him he doesn't need to be a first or second round pick to be accomplished. Let's get this back in perspective. He's going to be in the NFL." This was a shot at Barlow to snap out of this, get over himself, and to quit acting like a child, because he was now going to be playing in the NFL, and this was a horrible look. Talk about an amazing draft party. He throws this giant party, shows up late, then proceeds to not talk to anyone at the party, then leaves without telling anyone, then doesn't even hear his name get called, and leaves his friends and family who came out to support him like he wanted to, pick up the pieces and take the questions from the media. I've seen funerals happier than this, and understandably, this draft party disaster received a ton of criticism from the local media, with columnist Ron Cook summing it up best, saying, "I'm glad I wasn't invited to Kevan Barlow's draft party. He showed up late, left early, and didn't mingle much with the crowd while he was there. Some guy, huh?" You said it. Now, as for how Barlow's career in the NFL turned out, it actually turned out surprisingly well, considering how horribly his career started off. Barlow played 5 seasons with the San Francisco 49ers, and in that stretch, recorded 3,614 rushing yards and 24 rushing touchdowns. When you factor in his 1,143 receiving yards, he finished his 5 years in San Francisco with over 4,700 yards from scrimmage, and he finished his career in 2006 with the New York Jets, getting traded to the team following San Francisco's emergence of Frank Gore. Injuries derailed his career from that point, as he was out of the league after the 2006 season. However, when all was said and done, he finished his career with over 5,000 yards from scrimmage and 33 total touchdowns. In 2003, he even finished the season with over 1,000 rushing yards, and in 2002 and 2003, he finished 8th in the NFL in yards per carry, when he averaged 4.7 yards in 2002 and 5.1 yards in 2003. And during that 2003 season, amongst all running backs with at least 200 rushing attempts, he actually finished 5th in the league in yards per carry. On top of that, he scored a rushing touchdown in San Francisco's iconic victory in the 2002 wildcard against the New York Giants. If you want to learn more about how that controversial game ended, click the card in the upper right corner. Especially for a third-round pick, Kevan Barlow had a very solid NFL career, and I think the Niners have to be very pleased with how this pick turned out. And I bashed Mel Kiper before. I talked about his biggest draft whiff in a previous video of mine, when he had as the number 2 ranked quarterback prospect a guy who never played it down in the NFL and was drafted in the 8th round. So if you want to learn more about that embarrassing blunder, click the card in the upper right corner. However, to his credit, he had Kevan Barlow as the 5th best running back prospect in the draft. When all was said and done, of every running back chosen in 2001, so I'm excluding Michael Vick from this, Barlow had the 5th most rushing yards, behind Hall of Famer LaDainian Tomlinson, Deuce McAllister, Travis Henry, and Rudy Johnson. Kiper hit the nail on the head with that projection. But even though Barlow's career turned out alright in the end, his first impression was a really sour one, and that's putting it lightly. So with the draft coming up, if any NFL draft prospects happen to be watching this video and are going to be hosting draft parties for when they hear their name get called, here are some key takeaways and some free pieces of advice. Show up on time, or at the very least, don't show up 3 hours late. Don't leave early. Don't invite multiple people to come if you're not going to hang out with them and are going to spend the entire day by yourself. If you're going to leave early for whatever reason, tell people. And don't leave your friends and family to do your dirty work and speak to the media, especially since they likely have no training and will say things that, unbeknownst to them, will make you look incredibly bad and incredibly childish. Because when it came to draft parties, Kevan Barlow truly set the bar low. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at Jaguar Gator 9. To see college football videos, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. So you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.